Udyog Vihar is a dense industrial hub in Gurgaon that transforms after dark. During the graveyard shift, the streets completely empty out, leaving the high-rise office blocks to loom over a silent landscape. Inside Saffron BPO, the world felt entirely artificial. The air was filled with the sterile glow of white monitors and the constant low-level static of voices filtering through headsets. This was where a young woman named Rose worked. She was a top performer, quiet, efficient, and never late. Her workstation was always meticulously kept, a neutral space for a woman who rarely spoke to anyone. Everything changed at 12:30 a.m. Rose took a call that didn't end. She sat hunched over her desk for hours, whispering into her headset in a sharp departure from her usual professional routine. Concerned by the length of the call, the team leader topped into her line. He heard nothing but a dead line. No customer, no breathing. When he confronted her, Rose stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out without a word. She didn't return. When HR reached her family 3 days later, they received a shocking answer. Rose had died in an accident 8 years before she ever applied for the job. The office was left with an impossible question. If Rose was dead, whose bag had been sitting in the cubicle every night? Whose fingers had been typing on the keyboard? The environment began to turn. Agents heard heavy footsteps in the empty pantry and reported seeing a girl with red eyes staring back at them from the washroom mirrors, only for the room to be empty when they turned around. The anomalies moved into the hardware. Motion sensors triggered in locked rooms, and CCTV footage showed the shadows of water coolers elongating and shifting into human silhouettes. Eventually, the security of the network was breached. Rose's old computer terminal began booting up on its own, bypassing the login screens to sign in with her unique agent ID. The entity had transitioned into a digital parasite. It was no longer just an apparition in the hallway. It had successfully integrated into the BPO's electrical and server infrastructure. By 3 a.m. one night, an agent named Samar found himself alone on the floor. The rest of the team had gone downstairs for their break, leaving him in the silence of the empty cubicles. His headset clicked. An internal call was coming through. When he answered, he heard Rose's voice perfectly. "Hello, Rose this side. How can I help you?" The power flickered and died. In the faint moonlight from the windows, Samar saw Rose's empty chair. It slowly began to rotate on its own. He retreated to the pantry to find water, but as he reached for the cooler, a voice behind him whispered his name. He turned to see the red-eyed figure standing in the corner, watching him. Samar abandoned his gear and ran toward the emergency stairs, driven by the singular need to get out of the building. He reached the elevator and hammered the button for the ground floor, his heart racing as the door slid shut and the car began to descend. When the doors opened, there was no lobby. The elevator had opened directly onto a mist-covered graveyard, lit by a gray, unnatural light. Rotting, zombie-like figures stood among the headstones, their eyes fixed on the elevator. Among them was Rose, leaning forward to ask why he was suddenly so quiet. Samar collapsed in the corner of the elevator, shielding his eyes and praying. When the doors opened again, the morning shift was waiting to get on. He was back in the normal corporate lobby. Samar and his colleague Vineet quit their jobs the following morning. After that night, they could no longer treat the office as a place of business. The cause of the haunting was buried in the property records. Saffron BPO was built directly on top of a cemetery that had been demolished to make room for the industrial park. The stories from the floor eventually became too much for the company to manage. Saffron BPO shut down permanently, leaving the building dark and the cubicles empty. Several months later, Samar had finally moved on. He had a new job in a different part of the city and had finally put the events of Udyog Vihar behind him. But every night at 2:45 a.m., his phone rings. When he answers, he hears the familiar static of a call center headset and a woman's voice introducing herself as Rose. The caller ID traces back to the landline of the abandoned Saffron BPO. Even with the building empty and the power disconnected, the network is still dialing out.